Good evening. Well, as you just heard, Lorraine tells us that this is the first anniversary of this Chicago Infinite Way Reading Room. And I'll carry that one step further and tell you that this is the first anniversary of any Infinite Way Reading Room anywhere at all, because it was the first and it is the only Infinite Way Reading Room anywhere in the world at this present time. May possibly be that way forever, but if not, at least it is so now. And it is for that reason that it is a unique experience for us in the Infinite Way. I mean unique that it should be a year in operation. The reason is this, that there has never been any provision in the activity of the Infinite Way for the creation of a reading room or any other type of public meeting place. And it began here without any effort or conscious thought on the part of any of us outside of Boston, outside of Chicago. I think I lived in Boston too long. This reading room evolved in Chicago out of the consciousness of those of you here in Chicago who were with it in the beginning. And it was something that was absolutely unique and natural only to you here. No one else has thought of it any other place. No one else has tried it. And as a matter of fact, until probably this last couple of months, I don't suppose that there are many people anywhere outside of Chicago who have even known that there is such a thing as an Infinite Way Reading Room. Probably when it is better known, others may try it elsewhere. But if they do, I hope that they will remember that it will not survive unless it is a pure activity of the consciousness of those who start it. I mean by that if somebody just starts it because there is an Infinite Way, or because there is one in Chicago, or because it has continued for a whole year and been successful and had increasing attendance, if anyone else thinks to start it and say that if it could succeed in Chicago, it can succeed in New York, they will fail. Because it can only succeed where it is a pure activity in the consciousness of those who start it. In other words, by pure I mean that those who start it do not hope to benefit by it, or do not hope to gain from it, but hope to give to it, or give to the activity, or give to those who come to the room. The Infinite Way is unique as a religious or philosophical teaching or metaphysical teaching in that it definitely does not teach that you can get something, receive something, achieve something for yourself. Nor does it claim that through it you can get God to do certain things for you or bring certain blessings to you. On the contrary, it says definitely that since God constitutes your individual being, all that the Father hath is already yours, and so do not hope to get anything more from God or from man. But in the recognition of your oneness with God, be prepared to let the infinity of God flow through you to this world. And so it is that if anyone, anywhere, at any time, contemplates the opening of an infinite way reading room, let them be very clear in their minds that it is not going to bring any glory to them, it is not going to bring any profit to them, it is not going to benefit them in any way except in their giving and creating avenues through which to give. There isn't any room in the infinite way activity at all for self-glorification or for profit. It is a literal thing in the infinite way that we are the servants of the Most High. And that is not just a way of being humble and pious. It is an actual statement of the truth that exists. God is truth, and God is forever uttering itself, expressing itself. And the state of consciousness of an individual that is sufficiently in trouble may hear that voice and receive it and in turn impart it. The person who has sufficient health and sufficient supply and sufficient companionship isn't going to go very far in attaining spiritual life. At least in the recorded history of the world, those who received the greatest light were those who were in deepest need of spiritual light and who had to search more deeply in the realm of their soul than the person who was getting along beautifully without God. It takes desperation of one sort or another to drive us deep enough into the heart of God to find God. As a rule, it is when human companionship hasn't sufficed, human supply hasn't given us enough happiness or satisfaction or completeness, and when even human health hasn't made us relax in inner peace, that we then say, Lord, Lord, where art thou? Then it is that we begin this search for truth. Then it is that we try to find if there isn't a God, if there isn't a something somewhere that will bring to us that which we are seeking. What are we seeking? Most of all, peace. If we had peace, we wouldn't mind a little physical discomfort or mental discomfort or financial discomfort, but we haven't got peace. And at first we think that if we had enough education or a good enough job or a happy enough marriage or something else that we'd find peace. But even if we find financial comfort, good family, and all these other wonderful human things, very often we find there's still something else that we haven't achieved. And out of that hunger comes the search. Now then, when a trace of realization comes to us, and we begin to perceive the nature of my peace, not the peace that the world gives, my peace, inner peace, then is when our neighbors, members of our family, begin to inquire and wonder what we have. And then comes our opportunity for sharing. Now, if a person believes that in sharing this truth which they've received from God, that they are to receive glory or honors or reputations or wealth, then they are not seeing the situation correctly. Because a true spiritual insight will make one desirous of sharing the truth. There's no glory in that, because it wouldn't be your truth or mine. It's the revealed truth of God. So there can't be any personal glory in it. And the idea then comes to start sharing. Well, it comes to different people in different ways. With me, in the beginning, the idea of sharing came in healing work. Later, the idea of sharing was exemplified in writing the books. Still later, it was in teaching in classes. That wasn't for me. That was just a sharing of what had come to me. Incidentally, a byproduct was enough supply for my living, for my traveling, for my family. But heaven forbid that I should ever have thought of going into it for that purpose. It would have failed. So it is, as most of you already know, that a year ago when this room began, there was no idea in Lorraine's mind of getting a profit out of it or becoming famous or achieving anything for herself. It was her idea of sharing in this way whatever had come to her. So it is that I speak of this because it was mentioned that this is the first anniversary, and I do think it's a good opportunity to say this, that if one is touched by the Spirit of God and has the desire to share, they must never lose sight of the fact that what they are sharing is God's grace pouring through them, and that as they have received it freely from God, they must give freely of that which has come through God. Then, if there is to be a return, it will just be a reflex action of that which was given out. It is following the principle of the infinite way itself, wherein we are taught that it is an impossibility to demonstrate supply or companionship or home. I know that there are thousands of books dedicated to the teaching of demonstrating supply and demonstrating home and demonstrating companionship, but I also know that there isn't one of them that actually has succeeded in accomplishing that for anyone, because it's an impossibility. If they could do that, they would be breaking a law of God. If anyone in the history of the world ever demonstrates supply or home or companionship, they can proudly boast they have broken a law of God and proven God a liar. Because the Master, who is the clearest of all those we know as revelators, says distinctly that you must not take thought for your life, for what you shall eat, or what you shall drink, or wherewithal you shall be clothed, or for anything that has to do with your life. That you must take thought only for God, for truth, for the realm of God, the realization of God, the consciousness of God, the kingdom of God, And if you should demonstrate God, if you should demonstrate the realization of God, all these things will be added unto you. So the only thing that you ever can demonstrate is a conscious realization of the presence of God. And when you demonstrate that, you will find that in some miraculous way, the supply necessary to your existence will flow to you. The companionship, the friends, so forth, and those not of your own household will move on and move out. You will find that in a normal, natural way, as the years roll on, you will find yourself in an atmosphere of those of your own spiritual state of consciousness. And you will find that those who could not abide in that dwelling will have moved on to their own circle, to their own natural habitation, those of their own state of consciousness. And so it is. Let no one ever become active in any infinite way work, and I could go further and say in any other spiritual work, with any idea of getting from it, but only the idea of giving or sharing that which comes to them as the grace of God. Now, I started to tell you about the lost day that was found. When this trip was being arranged, planned, it so happened that Chicago set it in from 5:50 a.m. on the 9th of August to 6 p.m. on the 11th of August, and reservations were made that way, and everything was understood to be that way. And when I got here, and we had our work with Lorraine yesterday, I said, now, don't forget, I'm leaving at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. I'll be here in time to get me to the airport. Lorraine didn't contradict me and say that my original letter said the 11th. She just took it for granted, I suppose, that plans had been changed. And so it was that everything was arranged so that I was to go to the airport at 4 o'clock this afternoon, or leave for the airport, and leave on the 6 o'clock plane until this noon, when I looked at my watch, which has a date calendar on it, and saw that it was the 10th. And Gordon Buck was there, and I said, is this the 10th of the month? He said, yes. Oh, I said, that's impossible. My watch must be a day off, because this must be the 11th. Oh, no, he said, I know that this is the 10th. So does my watch, but I don't. Because I'm leaving here this afternoon for New York. And I'm only leaving on the 11th. Well, then you're not leaving till tomorrow. You mean tomorrow's the 11th? Well, where's that day in between? Well, it hasn't come yet. So tomorrow is the day that hasn't come. And it will be here, and it'll be a bonus day because I hadn't counted on it. Today for me was the 11th of August until this afternoon. At 3:30 it was finally confirmed that this is only the 10th. And so by 4 o'clock this bonus evening had been arranged. And that's how come we're here together tonight, because of a lost day. Otherwise, I would have been down looking for my 6 o'clock plane of the 11th on the 10th. I suppose they would have told me it hasn't come in yet. But that's why we're here tonight. No public talk had been arranged, and no talk with anything because of this trip. Now you already know that I've been in an awful lot of trouble. I'm kind of coming here a couple of months ago. You probably know that I've been catching Hades from many parts of this United States and Canada, and made a lot of bad friends through it. Because in coming to Chicago and having those few days here with you, I didn't go to 70 other cities in the United States and Canada, and it would seem that by that I offended. Well, that wasn't my intent. Again, let's go back to the principle of the infinite way. If there is anyone who really believes that there is a person called Joel Goldsmith introducing a teaching called the infinite way and responsible for it, they have missed the whole significance of this message. It never happened that way, and it isn't going on that way today. As far as Joel Goldsmith is concerned, he was a businessman. And he wasn't doing too badly in the business world, except for some momentary periods that everyone has sooner or later in business. But certainly there was no idea in his mind that he would at any time ever be connected with a religious work or a philosophical work or a metaphysical work, because that was no part of his consciousness. At best, it can be said that I had that heart hunger to find something more satisfying than a highball or a game of cards or a theater or a dance or even a successful business, and that I was trying to find something better than those things. And one day, as I said before, we come to our grace of God through our ills, through our discomforts. I was ill, very ill. Nothing serious, nothing more serious than a severe, nasty cold, but one of those very bad Great Lake winter colds, if you know what I mean. Mine wasn't in Chicago, it was worse, it was in Detroit. But I couldn't rise above it, and so I looked up a practitioner. And I found a man whom I'd never known before, never heard of, but he was in his office, and as he told me, he doesn't take patients on Saturday because he devotes that day only to study and prayer. But when he saw the condition I was in, he invited me into his office. And I not only had an instantaneous healing, but when I went out of his office, I couldn't smoke anymore, and I couldn't drink anymore, and I couldn't play cards anymore. And 2 days later, someone asked me for a healing and got it. And the day after that, someone else came to me and said, would you pray for me? And they had a healing. And that kept up for a year and a half. By that time, I was in the practice of healing. Now, that wasn't intentional. I wasn't seeking it. Had no idea of it. It just came upon me. And so it was that I never had any idea of leaving the practice. I was in the healing work 16 years. And so far as I am personally concerned, I would have been very happy to stay in it 16 years more, or 30 years more. I was very happy in it, very successful in it, very prosperous in it. Had no reason to give it up. But a whole series of these unfoldments and experiences came to me that resulted in the publication of the book, The Infinite Way. Well, I thought then that, well, you imagine what I thought. There were only 2,000 copies printed. And I had no more idea that those 2,000 copies would ever be disposed of. Well, it just was an impossibility. I did feel that a few hundred would be sold to some of my friends and patients. Never dreamed of anything beyond that. And as a matter of fact, I expected to just go on doing healing work. And if anybody wanted to know how, there was a copy of The Infinite Way to be had for $2 at that time. But you see, it didn't happen that way. I received an invitation from a Unity Center in Los Angeles to talk with them, and I talked for them for 7 weeks. And I thought that was just an incident. That couldn't happen again. But then I was invited to talk for the Institute of Religious Science, and I spoke 5 times for them. I was invited to San Francisco to the Metaphysical Library, and I talked, and each time I thought, this is just an isolated instance. until in San Francisco they said, why don't you give us a class? Now that was a funny one. I had never given a class, never thought of giving a class. I had had groups in my office in Los Angeles that first year that just came automatically. But now they said class. And so the very first closed class that was ever held was held in San Francisco. And so one step after another has led up to this. Never once with the idea of doing it that way. Never once with the idea of going into such an activity, each time being led into it. Well, as you know, I had nothing to do with this Infinite Way reading room in Chicago. Nothing to do with it. So if it's here, it's not an activity of Joel Goldsmith. It's an activity of God operating as or through the message of the Infinite Way, and it placed it here. The same way abroad. I had nothing to do with the work that is now being done in England. I mean, nothing consciously. A few books, copies of the Infinite Way, found their way to England, and here and there somebody liked it so well that they wrote me. And when they did, I was glad to send them the next book that came out. And a few liked that so well that they kept on writing me, and I sent them another book. Nobody could pay for it over there because you couldn't send currency out of England. And so it was always sent as a gift. Well, you see, there couldn't be any thought there of gaining or profit because there wasn't any way to gain or profit. It was just a way to share. And then out of a clear sky, a man of whom I had never heard, who had a magazine that I had never read, had never heard the title of it, discovered the Infinite Way and wrote an article on the Infinite Way for his magazine, and he never even let me know it. Never even wrote me or discussed it with me or nothing. He just found it, he liked it, and he wrote an article on it and published it in his magazine. And a metaphysical teacher in Los Angeles called me up and called my attention to it and sent me her copy of the magazine, and I wrote the man thanking him. Now, out of that man's publication of that article came a demand so strong that the second largest publishing house in Great Britain wrote me a letter asking if they could publish The Infinite Way in a British edition. I don't know if you know what that sounds like to get a letter like that, or what it feels like when there hasn't been a publisher in all the United States wanting to do that. And here out of the clear sky, the second largest one in England. And so that is the way the British edition of The Infinite Way came into publication. And out of that has come all of this work that eventually led to my first visit there, and then the second visit. And the second visit resulted in a closed class, in lectures, in more lectures up in Blackpool and Manchester, and then an invitation to go to Sweden, give lectures there. And out of that work has come the trip that I'm on now, which will require 6 weeks in England and a week in Holland, where a publisher is publishing the Dutch edition of The Infinite Way, a Dutch translation. Now, you know, Joel Goldsmith had nothing to do with that. You couldn't go over there and pay a firm to bring out your book for you. When they're ready for it, they ask you for it, and there it is. And if you can't believe in that, just imagine what happens that in Switzerland a firm asked to publish a German translation of The Infinite Way, and both of those are now ready and will be released in September, next month. Now, you don't see anything of Joel Goldsmith in that, do you? Because Joel Goldsmith couldn't possibly have done that. That is as much the activity of God appearing as a German edition, a British edition, a Dutch edition, a Braille edition, and now there's a Spanish edition in translation, as this room here. Now, if you can catch the principle of that, you will understand why. Success can come only when there is no individual desiring success. when there is no individual desiring to save the world, when there is no individual desiring to heal or teach the world, when there is an individual who has caught a glimpse of truth, or by the grace of God been given a little healing gift or teaching gift, when that individual is willing to share it, and without any thought of saving anybody or saving themselves or supplying anybody or supplying themselves, just as an idea of sharing it, then out of that comes such activities as you have seen in this room and in these translations and in the classes. Now, so that you will really believe me when I say that none of this infinite way activity has anything to do with Joel Goldsmith except that he is an instrument for it, let me tell you that there is to be a closed class in Cape Town, South Africa, and a closed class in Johannesburg, South Africa, and lectures in both of those cities, and Pretoria and Durban. Isn't that impossible? Because all of you know me well enough at least to know that I didn't have any hooks out in South Africa or advertisements or anything else. It happens so. And then on top of that comes, I suppose, the most exciting one, that some time ago the bishop of a Protestant church in the Gold Coast of West Africa found the infinite way and recommended it to his ministers, and he and two ministers, native Africans, with their churches, are using the infinite way and have invited me there, and although there's a revolution going on, they're getting permission from the government for me to come in spite of the revolution and talk to the native Africans about the infinite way. Do you see what I'm getting at? That an activity of God operates in human consciousness, and if we are sufficiently willing, it operates through us and then comes back to make us go out and do its work. We don't do it. We don't plan it that way. It operates, it goes through our consciousness and then goes out here and calls us to do work. Now, I'm happy to tell you all this for the main reason of bringing to light a secret that will ensure success in any activity in which you may be engaged. And a success that will come because of the activity of truth in your consciousness. You won't have to advertise, and you won't have to tell anybody that you're following a spiritual path or that you believe in God. You will never have to open your lips of your own accord, because this principle absolutely sets aside any sense of self that might interfere with your demonstration and permits it to be a demonstration of God. Now, you all know through reading, through study, and especially those of you who are at all familiar with spiritual or mystical writings, that it is always taught that you must get rid of the self with a small s, or that you must put aside the self, or Paul says you must die daily to yourself so that you can be reborn of the Spirit. In other words, the little self must grow littler so that the great self can become greater in your experience. Now, here is a principle which is found in the teaching of the Master, Christ Jesus. A teaching will guarantee the destruction of yourself and assure the rebirth of your real self, the big I that I am. The Master says that there are two things you must not do in public. You must not pray where men can see you, and you must not do your alms, your benevolences, where men can see you. Now just think what it would mean if you were, well, we'd say, first of all, to set aside something of your earnings or income for a spiritual purpose, but nobody was to know about it, and nobody was to know where it went. Nobody but you even knew that it went. Nobody even suspected that you were benevolent or charitable. Only you knew it, and nobody else. And as far as the rest of the world is concerned, they might even suspect, because you never mentioned such things, that you didn't even give to charity or benevolences or community funds or spiritual activities. And if nobody ever knew that you prayed, if that was such a secret from the world, that the world probably thought you were slightly atheistic, because it never heard you speak of praying, never saw you pray, never knew you to indulge, it never saw any public display of the Bible around you. Now just think how yourself would be deglorified. Just think how yourself would be deflated. On the other hand, just think how you glorify yourself if the world can point to you and say how generous you are or how holy you are. Look at all those Bibles you carry around with you, and you haven't missed a church attendance in 27 years, 6 months, and 4 weeks. You see, that inflates the selfhood. It gives glory to you, and in that degree cheats you of a God experience. Because the Master goes on to reveal that those things that the Father seeth in secret, he rewardeth openly. Ah, yes. When you can so deflate your human selfhood that you don't put it on parade, that you don't seek to set it up in public or get a reputation for this, that, or the other thing, when you are not seeking praise because of your charitableness or because of your mercifulness or because of your benevolence, you are deflating yourself, more or less. And you are permitting the big I that I am to perform its work. And because it operates in the invisible, well, Paul tells us that the things that are seen are made of those things which are not seen, invisible. The presence and power of God in the invisible appears visibly and tangibly in this world. It isn't any different than a metaphysical treatment or spiritual treatment of prayer. Any treatment of prayer that is a silent realization or recognition of God appears visibly as the health of somebody else. You have heard in the tape the two experiences that I've told about, one in Honolulu and one in Seattle. Both involved young girls who were in our classes. Both had the same experience. One in Honolulu took a bus home after the class, and in back of her was a much intoxicated man, very boisterous. And this girl, very silently and very secretly within herself, realized that the activity of the Christ, operating invisibly, was always made manifest visibly. In other words, the spiritual Son of God, which is invisible, appears to us as a human being. But always it is the Son of God. And this girl continued to meditate, let us call it, on the idea of God as the only mind of man, the only presence, the only power, and that appearances couldn't testify to truth. The truth was there even though hidden behind the appearance. And first thing you know, this man leaned over and said, "Thanks, miss, for praying. I'm all right now. I'll never be drunk again." How did he know? Well, he didn't know. He didn't know. God knew. He himself was so drunk that he couldn't know. So the little self was out of the way, and evidently his Christ self realized the presence of a Christ influence and awakened him. Awake, thou that sleepest, Christ will give thee light. He knew in the invisible that something happened. And the something that happened visibly. This other girl in Seattle had the same experience, only she went down to the coffee shop in the New Washington Hotel, have a cup of tea, and at the far end of the counter was this very boisterous, intoxicated man. And she also, silently, secretly, was realizing what we know about God as individual beings, law, and so forth. And this man walked the whole length of that counter, came over to her and said, "Miss, will you talk to me about God?" And for 30 minutes he made her talk to him about God, and at the end of that time he said, "This will never happen again." You see, what happened invisibly appears visibly. You don't need human advertising. Sometimes human advertising will drive people away from you, just as speech about the benefit of God or spirit will very often disgust people and drive them from you, and rightly so, because they're not thinking of God as we know God. They're thinking of God as their concept of God. Now, when I left here a few months ago, I went to Seattle to complete the work that was begun here, and on the plane I picked up a copy of a magazine, and there found that the editor was much disturbed because there is a God, and there is also sin, disease, and death in the world. There are deformed children being born, illegitimate children being born. There are horrible things taking place on earth, and yet they say there is a God. And evidently that disturbed him so much that he had 3 very prominent religious men. One, a nationally known priest, and a minister, and a rabbi, all nationally known men. He had them write articles for him on how this can be. And these 3 men all agreed that they couldn't answer that nobody knows why that is so. And you know that isn't so. You know that we do know why that is so. We know why. If I'm having a discord, or you are, don't let anyone here, don't let any student of the infinite way say they don't know why. Because it's marked out very clearly in this book why you are having a discord, or why I have a discord. It's very simple. It's in the degree of our sense of separation from God. Because the conscious realization of our oneness with God restores harmony. Now then, there are degrees of that realization. The moment we turn to a spiritual study, or any metaphysical study, we are beginning to realize our oneness with God, even though at first we only do it intellectually. Even though intellectually we agree with the Bible that we're to call no man on earth our Father, for one is our Father which is in heaven. Now, of course, I know that neither you nor I can spiritually realize the import of that when we first hear it, or are taught it, or read it. But at least, if we're sincere students, something within us will say, yes, that really must be the truth. Only God can make a tree, and so I'm willing to agree that only God can make me. I'll agree on that God must be the creative principle of my being. Now, of course, agreeing with that isn't going to do anything very special for you or for me. We have only taken the first step. We have intellectually agreed that this is true, that it's possible, and but we have acknowledged it, And we're told, acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he will give thee rest, peace. We've acknowledged it, and we've taken the first step. We've agreed now that God is the creative principle of our being. Well, later on, as we continue our studies, we read, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. And of course, that we're not quite so ready to agree upon, because the appearances don't testify to that. Oh no, it doesn't look at all like you and I have all that God has. But as we continue in our study, if we just won't fight it mentally, if we won't try to insist that somebody convince us of it beyond doubt, if we're patient with our studies, gradually it will dawn on us, well, what is God? And we'll see that God is life. Oh, well, in that case, I'll agree that the life which is God is my life. Later on, you'll find that God is the intelligence of this universe. And then you'll be willing to say, well, then if I have any intelligence, I'll agree it's the intelligence of God. And before you know it, you'll find yourself agreeing, Son, all that I have is thine. You'll agree that all the Father hath is yours. You are not going to demonstrate it yet, because up to this point you probably have only agreed with it intellectually. You said, yes, now I can see that it's so, but so what? And so you go from one truth to another. And if you're at all like the rest of us, you'll someday say, well, I know all the truth that's to be known, but it doesn't seem to do much for me. Or I wonder why it doesn't work for me. I saw so-and-so get a healing. And I can tell you now what the answer is. The answer is that so far, it has only been an intellectual acceptance of the truth. It hasn't been a spiritual discernment of it. It hasn't been an inner, absolute knowledge or conviction. It hasn't come with spiritual power to make itself alive. And it is for that reason that we have to study for years and practice for years, because it is like the illustration I use in the writings, is like peeling off onion skins. When we first come to our spiritual studies, we are as thick as a big onion and as opaque. As we study and catch a little glimpse here and a little glimpse here, an onion skin drops off of grossness, of materiality. Not enough for us to notice it. Oh no, we look at ourselves and say, I am making no progress whatsoever. And maybe a few months later, another onion skin drops off. We look in the mirror and say, I'm just as material, I'm just as sick, I'm just as poor, I'm making no progress. And then you'll probably say, well, then why are you sticking to this? I don't know, I just can't give it up. And so you stick with it. And so, bit by bit, an onion skin drops away until one day the first realization comes. And you say, oh, I see. What do you see? Oh, I don't know, I can't explain it to you. Oh, it's all right, now I know what you mean. What are you talking about? I don't know. But I know what you mean. That's wisdom. Because if you could explain it, it would mean you didn't have it. Nobody can ever explain spiritual wisdom. All you can do is reveal in human intellectual terms what happens in your consciousness. In other words, when I bring to you this principle of secrecy, of not praying in public, not giving alms in public, to me that was an inner spiritual experience. But when I give it to you, it isn't that to you. It is merely the statement of a principle which you intellectually accept or reject. But if you live with it long enough, you absolutely know it so thoroughly that you'll never again be tempted to either make a display of your religion or your religious convictions or of your charity. And then if someone asks you about it, you won't be able to answer them except to refer to the passages of the Master in the book. But you won't be able to tell them what you feel any more than I can tell you. I can merely quote to you those passages where you can read about it. But I've felt something beyond that that shows me the truth of it, the reality, the demonstration of it. And so it is. If you have ever been responsible for healing anyone of anything through treatment or prayer, you must admit that you don't know how it happened. You can't possibly know how it happened. All you can know is that something happened. What it is, you will never know as long as you're on earth. Nobody will ever know. You feel a click. I don't know if you'd even call it a click. It just happens that I call it a click for want of any other word. Or I have called it a release. You might not call it that. Whatever it is, call it a click, call it a release. I feel something. Something happens. What, I don't know. And then somebody says, I feel better, or I'm healed, or it was an instantaneous healing, or it was this, or it was that. But if they were to say to me, how did you do that? I said, brother, if I knew how I did that, I'd be doing it all day and all night. I just wouldn't want to eat or sleep anymore. I don't know how I did that. As a matter of fact, I didn't do it. It happened in me or through me. Now, I have never met a really spiritually minded practitioner or teacher who would ever give any other answer than, I don't know how it happens, it just happens. Nobody can explain the process of healing, because how can we explain God? Now, as we study Scripture, or as we study our writings, we find one principle after another, like the secrecy. That's a principle. That's not just being good. That's not just being humble. That's an actual principle. You learn to keep your mouth closed about your prayers and your religion and your charities, you'll find that it's a principle that the Father seeth in secret and rewardeth openly. Well, you'll find that you are to pray for your enemies, and that you're to forgive 70 times 7. And that sounds like, if you could do it, you'd be a very virtuous person and entitled to a lot of credit. But that isn't true at all. As a matter of fact, you'll find you can't do it. You just can't pray for I'm speaking now as a beginning student. You can't pray for your enemies. It almost would, you choke on it, knowing yourself to be a liar and a hypocrite. You'll find that you can't forgive 70 times 7. Oh, yes, you can forgive something not very important to you. But you'll find there are certain things that are just beyond the stage of your being able to forgive. And then you'll say, yes, but that wouldn't be in that New Testament if that weren't some kind of a law of life. The Master didn't come to tell anybody how to achieve success or peace. He came to give principles of living. He didn't come to feed the poor. He came to show the principle of feeding the poor. When he fed the poor, it was merely an example of the principle that he was teaching. And so you say, so I have to learn to forgive my enemies. I have to learn to pray for my enemies. And you have intellectually accepted that principle. Now you try to put it into practice, and if you are at all like the rest of us, you find it difficult. And you'll have to keep practicing it and practicing it and practicing it until the day does come when the realization dawns on you, this is all wrong. I don't have to forgive anybody. They never did harm me. If they were stupid enough to do that, they harmed themselves. Oh, I forgive you. It's all right with me. Why? Because I don't really forgive you. Now I know you never did anything to me that I need forgive you for. What you need is your own forgiveness, or God's forgiveness, because, brother or sister, you've laid up some treasure for yourself that you are not going to enjoy reaping. And then you find that in that you have achieved the spiritual discernment of forgiveness. it isn't really being magnanimous at all. Its meaning is that you realize now that nobody on earth has ever harmed you. They've harmed themselves, and they'll have to wake up to that, and they haven't harmed you. As a matter of fact, in making you learn this lesson, they've blessed you. Well, so it goes. You will find principles throughout the Bible. You'll find these principles expounded and expanded in the Infinite Way writings. But even though you have a feeling within you that this is all true, don't look around for any miracles from that, because the miracles do not begin until you begin to catch the spiritual perception of it, the inner click, the inner awareness, the inner light. If our students, who have been studying for years, they may have studied other approaches, may have studied this approach from its beginning, if they feel they have not made the progress that they should have made, first of all, let them not judge by appearances, because they might be very next door to the demonstration. Their prosperity, their spiritual prosperity, may be just around the corner. No one knows how close they are to spiritual realization, because it is true of every one of us that we are humanly opaque the very minute before the spiritual illumination comes. It doesn't come gradually. It always comes in a blinding flash. But it has been coming gradually without our knowledge from the minute that we turn to a spiritual teaching. You see? From the minute that you became an earnest student of a spiritual teaching, I don't care which. It could be the Hebrew faith, it could be the Protestant or Catholic, the Yogis, or Christian Science, or Unity and New Thought. Anytime you turned to anything of a transcendental nature, that minute you started a little stir under those onion skins.